Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. In case you're new to the community, this is a podcast where we, Anmol, Avyay, Ved, and myself, Sriram, your hosts, talk about various topics from the perspective of 12th graders who have just wrapped up school. Today, we'll be talking about the generation gap and with specific emphasis on the generation gap between us and our parents and the kind of interactions that can lead to. Avyay, would you like to get started?
Okay, yeah. So first off, I'd like to talk about the comparability of lifestyles, right? We have all heard this. Do you know, to go to my school, I used to travel through forests, over mountains, and dig trenches
Through
under
rivers.
rivers and stuff. These over exaggerated lifestyles that they used to lead, and they sort of see our lifestyles as much easier because of their sacrifices and their hard work. But is that really so? That's a huge question that we can put forward, right? Is it true that it's easier for us in this day and age to survive than it was for them? And how can you compare those two? Like, do you guys have any ideas on this?
Yeah, I actually do. Whenever someone says this or I see a joke on this, I actually think about this, and this is the same thought that hits me every time, even though I forget it. Whatever our parents have told us, their parents have told them, and this, if you think about it, has no exception.
Obviously, it's like our parents have also been told told the same thing by their parents, and I'm 100%. If I have an opportunity to say to my kids, I'm not going to back out. I'm going to say it to them also. Do you know how
Yeah,
I used to travel to school in auto? Okay, that's going to be hard. Maybe it's going to be like a hard thing in the future. So it's something like you've done it, so you have to own up the pride to it. I feel it that way.
Hmm.
I mean it's a way to brag at your kids also because you can see that it's life is a little easier for them now than it was for you. So you have to show that, yeah, I was raised as a tough kid and this is what made me into what I am, that sort of thing. It's
Why are
a
you
proper
talking about
bragging
our
opportunity.
dude? You're talking about our kids in present tense.
No, I'm saying this from our parents' view, that's why.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry.
No, but the problem is that we as our generation face our own set of problems, right? For example, because in their our parents, right, they grew up in a time when like the economy was still rising up in like countries like India, like ours. So they to find employment, to build, make houses, it was an easier thing than compared to now. So leasing houses now, the rent, the cost of ownership, it's a huge part of daily expenses. And you see daily expenses are skyrocketing with each year, right? And it's not just about saying, hey, it's inflation because of which like the costs have obviously risen. If you account for inflation as well, even then our age group has to face higher levels of daily expenses. So
Yeah, the
there are
cost of
things.
living has certainly risen since their standard. I mean,
Exactly, yeah.
you have more that you need, that is more essential now. Back then it was just food and water, but then now you need other essentials, right? Like an internet connection or like a 24-hour like electricity so that you can get heated water, that sort of thing.
Netflix.
The essentials are different, and because of that, it's tougher to obtain these essentials also when you're like at a lower pay grade sort of thing also. So it's tougher to afford compared to when our parents were kids, say.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like with evolving essentials, with evolving things that define essentials as well, there's a lot of things that we too have problems with, right? And it's not like our generation has it all completely easy for us to be condemned as a lazy generation. This just seems like a lazy characterization instead
Yeah.
by saying calling us lazy. So yeah, that's a huge part about comparability of lifestyles.
But do you realize? Okay, let's take the simplest example of other generations not being able to understand the previous generation or the next generation. Isn't it always true? A batch in a school always thinks the next batch, the coming batch, is absolutely useless.
Yeah, this is very true.
Because
I mean, this is putting it very simply, but yeah, it makes sense.
yeah, because like obviously we've told n number of times, like in normal discussion, it's like, oh, after our batch, our juniors are absolutely useless. There's no hope for this school. This school's going to die within another 3 years.
Yeah.
But this has been,
Honestly, I think, I mean, for me, I don't think that way, because there are some juniors who are like really good guys, overall
Ram
well-rounded
after certain
characters.
juniors
And
for
but that's the general
bruh, no, you
consensus.
don't say that. Okay, I also, I mean, like, when you think about it, okay, this is definitely going to be contested, but I feel like our batch was definitely better than both our seniors and our juniors in a
That's
lot of
what you
ways.
feel. That's what you feel.
If
Exactly.
you
So
And
think
that's his
about it,
point,
not
right?
it's true to a huge extent, Anmol. Like, it's not just in terms of academics alone. You
let's
see
just
other.
yeah,
let's just think
exactly.
of the look. Let's just think of the immature things our batch has done, and you're just like, okay, this is not worth it.
No, immature,
In
but it
a,
was, we did it with full knowing fully well that it was immature, and we just did it for fun,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Like the snail thing that we did during lunch break when we all
yeah,
marched around like
and
snail
the
doing our last
monkey
fingers.
dance.
Yeah,
Monkey
okay.
dancing.
Yeah, but the whole thing is obviously our juniors couldn't understand why we were doing that, and that's the same reason I would also superimpose that our parents are not completely fully able to understand what we mean by our actions and our words. Look,
Yeah, so
some
I'll
juniors,
I'll give you
some,
I'll simplify this, all right. So us doing that and our juniors and seniors not well, we were the seniors, but our juniors not understanding that because it was it was an inside joke, right?
yeah,
That's why we
okay,
were the
look,
only ones who knew the meaning. So stuff that we do as a generation collectively and the older generation doesn't understand is because it's like a massive inside joke. I think
Exactly.
that kind of conveys the point,
okay,
but
okay. Yeah, so the point is it's an inside joke because the generation can relate to each other with that thing.
yeah.
Okay, look, and one more thing about schools in general, which I feel is very relatable to generation gap is, as I've been growing each year, right? Like when I was in sixth, I still remember I used to look up to the eighth graders in my van and be like, what are these people studying so intently? How is their
Hmm.
life so complicated? And now, when I was in 10th, when I look back to an eighth graders, they just look like immature pricks.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh my god.
They look like immature pricks. Okay, but okay, now even 10th graders. When I moved to 12th grade, when I look at 10th graders and I'm just like, what are they doing with their lives? When you're
Yeah.
Yeah,
in
it's all about
each phase of
perspective,
life,
isn't it?
right?
Yeah,
At the
When
end of
you're
the
our
day,
in
it's all
each
seniors
about
phase,
probably
perspective.
think the same
yeah,
of us.
exactly.
Yeah,
Till today, right?
our seniors looking at us screaming bus wankers outside the
Oh my
building
god, I
Whoa.
was getting censored.
wouldn't really put up a mature impression of us, right?
Look, that's the point, right? So,
Yeah,
with each growing year, as you grow up too, you feel the mature generation is obviously the one after you. You never feel that you have reached the mature generation
yeah,
Hmm.
because there's
in
always a
terms of
level that you have
maturity.
to go up.
Yeah, yeah. But when we reach that level, we just realize, oh, we can be as dumb as we used to be in 10th. Okay,
Yeah.
but still you feel you own that level of maturity and stuff like that. But I still feel that though the 12th graders or our seniors didn't explicitly do something, even if they did it, we never understood it. Just like our juniors never understood what we do.
Hmm.
So
Because
that's basically how you summarize generation gap. Whatever a
yeah.
generation does, it's just that the other two, the generation above and the generation below, don't understand it. It's an inside joke.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
So generation gap is an inside joke, technically.
Yeah, this
It's
reminds me of this meme where I think, have you guys seen the one where you've seen the brain meme, right? The increasing stages of
Yeah.
yeah,
IQ. Yeah,
Yeah.
so basically it was just the a set of brains in increasing order, and the text next to them went whom whomst do. You should Google it.
What?
It's actually, yeah, it's such a weird but funny meme. You know what? Right?
No, I
Will
didn't get what you said. You started laughing before you completed
dude.
the
Okay,
laugh.
wait. Let
sorry,
me tell
sorry.
you again. You can't describe a meme to someone and expect them to laugh
Yeah,
just
sorry, sorry.
because.
You know what? I'll
Except
just put it
except
up
Avi,
in the.
except Avi, no one laughs on those things.
I'll put it up. I'll put it up as a card on
I
the final
understood what he
video.
was saying. I mean, I like the meme.
Okay, yeah, and in the comment section of that video, there was one which went boomer humor making fun of their wife, millennial humor making fun
I
of
know
their
this.
life, and then Gen X humor whom's did.
No, it was like this. It was a boomer humor is something deep, and then it's like actually making fun of society or something like that. And then millennials or something like, oh my life sucks and stuff. And then
Yeah.
Gen Z humor, our generation. I'm so proud to say this, but our sense of humor is John Lemon. I'm not even kidding. I lost it. It wasn't even ironic. I lost it for half an hour. John Lemon.
Okay.
Hold on,
You know what's funnier? I'll show you guys on screen itself. It's much better. You can see it, right? This.
Eating a clock is time consuming.
Okay, look, one more thing is, yeah, such kind of memes. And one more thing is, look, I wouldn't say dark humor is the best way to express it, but I've noticed one thing, that the tendency of our generation liking dark humor and weird things like that does not transcend in the upper generations. A very less people, especially in India, who are elder to us, like dark humor as much as us.
Yeah.
Are
That's
you sure
something.
about that?
Yeah, I'm 100%
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
about that.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
they don't think it's
Yeah,
humor.
yeah,
They think
They think it's disrespectful, right?
yeah, yeah.
It,
Yeah, yeah. The older generations, like the people who are in their 70s now, yeah, they tend to think that.
That's what like generation gap essentially is, not understanding inside jokes. So
we
so
did,
when
boys.
you,
We just solved the generation gap.
yeah, technically.
But there is a lot of other instances also that we've all faced, I'm sure, where we're like, why is this the case, and what's the reason behind this? I mean, I don't understand. I can't grasp my head around this. Why do they act like this? Or they would have also thought, why are our kids acting like this? Doesn't make any sense. We weren't like this as kids. Have you ever
Exactly. I
had
mean,
that?
I bet our parents they would probably be likely to ask the question like, what's funny if a person wears a pink suit and goes around making
Yeah.
fun of random people on the street? Oh wait, these two haven't watched Filthy Frank, have they?
I know Filthy Frank.
Oh yeah, okay. Abhyay?
Like, at least
no, I don't.
Okay, okay.
so the point is, at this point, what we can look, what I would like to also focus on is the whole thing of permissions. Why are we still seeking permissions from our parents? We consider ourselves adults. I remember Avyay told this really wonderful thing in the middle of class, in English class. He told something that I still consider one of the best things someone has ever told in class. Not funny in the way of how mature the thinking was. Our English teacher told us that her daughter or something wanted to go on a trek, and she still seeked permission. And at this point, she seeked permission. She asked whether I should let her go or no. And I remember Aviya said that the whole point that she asked for permission, that means she respects the decision a parent is taking.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And that means she's independent enough to know that a parent's always thinking the good for a child, and that's why she's asked permission. And that statement was so mature, because it does reflect on the fact that he has thought about the perspective from the parent also, and from the perspective of the child also. But
Yeah.
I would like to know more about what do you guys think, that this whole
Yeah.
situation
So
with permissions and asking our
I
parents.
remember, I
Huh.
remember this day actually. I think it was very few of us who were supporting taking permission and like
Yeah, yeah.
requiring permission to go on something that you should be able to do because you're an adult
And
now,
Abhay
right?
was the least expected supporter we would have.
Yeah, honestly, even I didn't expect that. But so the thing is, it's pretty straightforward. If you're living under the house, under the roof that your parents have provided for you, then you owe it to them, right? I mean, it's the
yeah,
least
Exactly.
you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do.
Yeah.
and
I
more
mean, that's all I
importantly,
thought of it. That was the most basic thing in my mind.
yeah,
Hmm.
and like more importantly, it's not just about asking of permission. I'm sorry, it's not just the kid asked me permission, let me think of yes or no. The fact, yeah, like Anmol said, the fact that the kid has gone and asked itself shows some maturity from the kid. more importantly, we are humans, right? We are extremely social beings, and it's not like birds or something where you're born of fly kind of an attitude. You can't say the moment you turn 18, I'm going to kick you out on the road and have like happy birthday to you, now get out of my house. That kind of an attitude does not work. So you have to gradually ease into it, obviously, and
Hmm.
especially in a country like India where we are so heavily reliant on our parents on many aspects, right? And family ties are considered to be extremely close. So yeah, it's something you have to ease into. You can't just drop it like a bombshell and here's your PAN card, here's your credit card, get out of my house kind of a thing. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
yeah, that's true. So,
You owe it to them. Like they've given you so much, and if you're still under their care, so there is some responsibility, right? Even though you're an adult now and they're not entitled to, you're not entitled to their care. As long as they're still taking care of you and they're still providing you with a house, with a roof to live under and food to eat, you owe
Mm.
it to them to know that this is what you're doing. I mean, it's not about like constant surveillance, like helicopter parents or something, but the least you can do is just ask for their permission, right?
I think
Mhm.
beyond the materialism of it, like when you look at it, off late, I'm sure you've gone on trips with your parents quite often in the last 5 years or so, right? And
Yeah.
Mhm.
they have had time to observe how your mind works. So like I said, beyond the materialist part of it, it's in a lot of cases, especially when you're easing into adulthood, your parents' opinions, and not just opinions, their suggestions to as to how to move forward with your life can be absolutely invaluable. Like it's just even when it comes to like tiny moral cues that to set your mind straight on an issue,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah,
Yeah, that
they're
completely makes
vastly
sense.
experienced at a lot of these things, so it
Yeah.
definitely
And
I feel like their opinion would be the most important to take on almost any issue you would encounter.
yeah, and you can think of it like some kind of an experiment. I mean, the scientist who conducts the experiment knows the experiment the best. So
Exactly, yeah.
simply put, they have been observing us for so long. So obviously, we have to consider their opinions as well. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? Yeah, so like slightly moving on, I wanted to discuss the reasons why this generation gap would exist. I mean, there are few couple of reasons, but starting off, I'd like to talk about acceptable actions and words. So we all know, right, how acceptability changes through the ages. Like something that is acceptable in say 1950s is maybe considered completely offensive and even criminal to some extent in 2020. So obviously this changes. So the way they perceive things and the way they look at stuff will not change with times, and that's because it's ingrained into their character. So what happens is this creates huge differences in not just in personal relationships, in like professional ones as well, in the workplace, stuff like that. You see older generation people tend to have a different view and different perspective of what the workplace is as compared to the younger generations. So that's a huge change for me. What about you guys? Like, do you have anything to add on this?
Look, when we discuss, we also discuss a lot about tech and how parents or the people who are elder to us cannot access or utilize tech to the best extent. And that's true because they've not grown up with tech like us. Because your maximum amount of learning happens from your age of 9 to 20, and our parents didn't have the tech which is very much relevant now back then. And I feel that when tech becomes like in the future, even we are going to face the same situation. So the point is what you're learning when you're learning is a very big part of generation gap. And just just because we don't end up learning the same thing, it ends up creating a gap in total communications also in the future.
Yeah, to add on this, right? Like basically, just like what Anmol said, it's based on exposure, and we all know that the learning curve for toddlers is huge, as they have a huge capability to grasp information. I mean, that's how they learn a new language at such a young age as well. So the thing
Hmm.
is, if we are exposed to technology from such a young age, we are more likely to understand it and integrate it as part of normal life. So what happens is we are more engaged with it, and as a result, we know it better than these people who even 30-year-olds or 35-year-olds who were first exposed to technology at that age have a little bit of a hardness, like understanding certain aspects of technology that say like a 2010 born child would already be proficient in. So there's aspects like that which really trickle down to basically when you were raised and what technology was at that time period, right? So
Hmm.
that adds to a generation gap as well.
Actually, I had this interesting example for this. So recently, my mom joined a new company. She joined Amazon, and she's been working with
Flex.
Windows. So she's been working with Windows computers her whole life. She's a coder at heart, and now increasingly companies are issuing Macs for some reason.
Yeesh.
And you know how on a Mac, on a Mac you have one single touchpad, right? Even on most modern Windows computers, you have one single touchpad, but the trackpad is
Yeah.
one single surface.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Historically, like the Mac has always been inclined to that kind of design. So when you look at that, when our generation, when we look at that touchpad, we know exactly what gestures do what. We know that if we swipe outward, it zooms out, or
Hmm.
zooms in, and if we use two fingers on the pad, it's going to scroll. We know somehow those things automatically come to us. But when my mom was finding it difficult to navigate this kind of an interface, she had to call me, and I sat down with her and I showed her exactly how it works. So yeah, it's interesting to think about how some things just come naturally to us, which we can't really explain how they do. They just do. And for our parents, we that's not always the case.
Hmm.
Yeah, I actually have a very similar story. So this is like a few years ago, and I got my iPod Touch. Okay,
Hmm.
so this was when we were having those button phones, or like the BlackBerry QWERTY keypad on phones, that sort of
Hmm.
thing. So
Hmm.
there was barely any touchscreen phones that were floating around, and at the time my dad had a phone, Samsung Galaxy S2, if I remember correctly, and I didn't know how to set up this iPod, even though I was a kid and my dad's grown up, obviously.
Hmm.
So my dad got the iPod and he set it up all by himself, and it took me so much time to wrap my head around how he was able to do all of this. And because my dad's in the IT field also, he was able to do it. So I think this explains a lot about, like, suppose your mom gets a new phone the next day, or your grandmom gets a new phone like tomorrow, say, we are more likely to be able to understand how to use that phone without even using it once before in our entire lives.
uh,
Yeah,
exactly,
and
exactly.
they wouldn't know how to do it even though they've got years of experience using a phone, because it may not be the same kind of technology that they're used to, right? So this
Yeah.
familiarity is what gives us that edge over, I think, kind of begins to explain how we are able to be that familiar with technology.
I think
Hmm.
it's more like, it's generally proven when you talk about cognition and people's learning abilities, that if you do something hands-on, it will always stick in your mind. It'll be tuned into your head like muscle memory almost.
Hmm.
So I think that plays, since we have been
Sorry.
interacting at this age of learning, since we have been interacting with these devices so closely, I think that might be what gives us a bit of an edge.
No, I mean, not just the us having an edge over them part, but say you were to, like, I don't know, use the dial-up phone, like the one with the wheel and stuff, you wouldn't be able to figure out how to use that immediately, right? You'd need
Yeah, yeah,
your grandfather or your grandmom or great grandmom to say how to use this. So
yeah,
it's that familiarity that, like, that age of that era of technology would have been familiar to them, and that's why
yeah.
it's not as easy to grasp something that's not from your generation,
Hmm.
or that's not
Hmm.
targeted towards your generation.
So while we're on the topic of technology, and now that you brought up telephones, thanks for reminding me. It brings to mind some examples that I'm sure all of us have encountered in our daily lives. That is communication gaps between us and, say, our parents. Basically, things like references that we would make that they wouldn't understand, references that they would make that we wouldn't understand, things like that. So yeah, Ved, would you like to elaborate on that?
But those things you learn to live with, right? Like the lingo you use with friends is different than the lingo you use with
Yeah.
parents.
No, but I understand. I understand what he's trying to
Yes.
say. If I understand correctly, I mean, again, it's all coming back to the simple explanation that Anmol gave. It's an inside joke. And with every generation, the kind of inside joke changes, right? Because that's the whole point of a generation, right? Things are different from the last, and that is what separates us from the last, right? So that is why the level of the inside joke also changes. And what do you do when you're frustrated when you can't get an inside joke between a separate group of friends? You get annoyed, right? Because you're not able to understand that.
Or you
So
just
I think,
laugh it off and hope they don't,
yeah,
pester
yeah. So
you.
that's what. So I think that's the easiest way to address this.
Hmm.
So a lot of times we've noticed that our grandparents speak to our parents in the actual mother tongue with the local dialect, but when that message or the same phrase or something is passed on to us, it's mixed with a bit of English or mixed with a bit of another language. So why do you think this is so? Does it have anything to do with the generations, or is it just a random coincidence?
Look, for me, right, I've never had the problem of language barrier between parents to grandparents because I've understood both the languages, but I've seen cases it is extremely weird. Like I know some cases where the son or the daughter is brought up only in English and they converse in this weird way with the grandparents in Canada. And I remember this particular example and it was so weird because I don't even know how they understand each other. Because on a superficial level, the grandparents don't understand English, and the grandson doesn't understand Kannada, and but they still manage to communicate with each other, and that's beautiful to see at some points. But in some cases, it also causes misunderstandings and other kind of things. But yeah, I don't know. It's something I would say is really debatable.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So this actually is a really important topic called as language brokering. So basically what it says is that while you may still be able to communicate with them saying stuff like, hey, hi, how are you, in either your native language or in a different language, and you can understand it, there's a different, you using different languages in front of them in itself will instigate generation gaps. For example, okay, so this basically is consists of two parts. First off, either you're speaking a different dialect of the same language. For example, if you're from an English speaking household, the entire language of English is evolving rapidly, especially in this globalized age, right? So we see different words coming into play. We see like different phrases. So these things would not be understood by by the like previous generations, not just our parents, our grandparents as well. The second point could be you're from a like you're from a place where your the parents and your grandparents speak a particular language, but you don't. You speak a different language. So what happens is, although you may be able to go back to your native language and or your native dialect and say, hey, hi, how are you doing? When you spend most of your time talking in this new language in this new way or in this new dialect, what happens is that you're basically you're extending the gap of the generation gap that exists between you and your grandparents, simply because you doing this means that you it shows your grandparents that you have a lot of different topics you talk about that does not really come down to what they can understand. So as Anmol said, it's basically like one big inside joke. Again, we keep coming back to this. That's mainly the essence of this entire discussion. So this reinforces that in their minds, and you're more likely to lose conversation time you would have with them if you speak in a different language in front of them. And this is not something that we can control, right? Because we are used to speaking in a different language. We're used because we interact on a daily basis using this. We go to schools for like what 8 hours or 9 hours a day where we talk like this. So coming back home and immediately switching back to an older dialect or a little old different language is going to be obviously going to be hard. So like, what do you guys have to say about this? Do you guys have any ideas on this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have kind of had this. I mean, I wouldn't call it a dilemma. It's not really something that qualifies as a dilemma. But since I was a kid, my parents are from two different language backgrounds. My dad's from a Telugu family and my mom's from a Tamil family. So it's I don't know either language. So we usually end up speaking a mix of Kannada and English. And ever since I was a kid, they would by default talk to me in English, and we would and since we studied in an English medium school, it really hampered the rate at which I learned Kannada, which is what is my mother tongue in actuality.
Hmm.
So. I'd say, I mean, it's definitely worth the effort to try and bridge this
Wait,
language gap.
on a lighter
Yeah.
note, I never understood what Ram said because his mother's side is Tamilian, his dad's side is Telugu, and his mother tongue is Kannada.
Sorry, that's what I consider. I mean, see, I mean, it's complicated, alright. Like it's a
Your
mixed,
mother tongue
completely
is not
mixed language.
Kannada, but it's what you speak at home, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, that's what I
Yeah.
meant. Yeah. Yeah. It's Kannada is what I mainly speak at home.
A
Yeah.
conscious
So
effort for
it's
this.
it's definitely worth taking a like, if you speak in English by default, it's definitely worth the effort to try and speak in the local language that your family speaks at home, because it really gets you focused on the conversation that you're having with your parents, and it really helps uh bridge that communication gap that we mentioned.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's something I've been trying personally for the last year or so, and it's worked out well, so I'd say it's worth a shot.
Yeah. So, like another problem that I've identified with regards to generation gap would be the evolution of how we raise our kids, right? So, what we say is the existing value system that our grandparents imbibed in our parents is not necessarily going to be the same that they imbibe in us. The value system changes. So when our grandparents see us doing something that was not adhering to how they were raised or how they raised their kids, they're obviously going to be like in like a dilemma kind of a situation where they don't understand whether they should interfere and bring back their old kind of values, or they should just let their kids do the job of being a parent. So I'm pretty sure like we've all had instances of this. Like I remember Ved was telling that he had an idea. Ved, can you like elaborate on that?
Whatever was taught to our parents by our grandparents was expected to be passed on from our parents to us.
Yeah.
But then, because times change, it has to adapt, right? So obviously, it won't translate into the same value systems that our grandparents were used to. Okay, with that, we come to the end of our sixth episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Just a reminder, we are uploading quick clips on various platforms, all of which have been linked in the description below. So make sure to keep watching the Noise Podcast and stay safe.